You've probably had this moment. You make a solid point in a meeting, and it gets ignored. 5 minutes later, someone else says the same thing, and suddenly it's brilliant. Or you ask for a favor politely, reasonably, and get a vague, maybe. But you've seen others ask less politely and get an immediate yes. This isn't about confidence. It's not about intelligence, and it's not about being more aggressive. It's about how human persuasion actually works. Decades of research show that people don't decide logically first. They decide emotionally and socially, then justify it later. In this video, you'll learn the 6 principles of persuasion, originally identified by Robert Cialdini, explained simply, ethically, and practically, with exact phrases you can use in real conversations. No manipulation, no tricks. Just psychology that works because it respects how people think. You're not imagining it. Persuasion does feel harder than it should. You can be thoughtful, prepared, and genuinely trying to help, and still watch your ideas land flat. You suggest something reasonable in a meeting and get silence. You ask for clarity and get a soft, "We'll see." You try to set a boundary and immediately feel guilty, like you've done something wrong. Here's the uncomfortable truth most people never hear. Being logical is not the same thing as being persuasive. That doesn't mean logic is useless. It means logic alone doesn't move human beings. Most of us were taught that if we explain clearly, people will understand. And if they understand, they'll agree. But real life keeps proving otherwise. People nod politely, then do nothing. Or they agree in principle, then avoid commitment. Or worse, they resist without explaining why. This isn't because you're weak. It's not because you lack confidence. And it's not because people are irrational in some random way. It's because persuasion runs on psychology, not just information. Why smart people struggle to influence. Many capable, intelligent people struggle with influence for one simple reason. They were never taught how influence actually works. In school and work, we reward knowledge, analysis, and correctness. We don't teach how humans decide under uncertainty, pressure, or emotion. So, when persuasion fails, people blame themselves. They think, maybe I'm not assertive enough, or I should explain more. What usually happens next is over-explaining. You add more data, more reasons, more justification. Ironically, this often makes people less likely to agree. Why? Because when someone feels overwhelmed, cornered, or subtly pressured, their brain goes into protection mode. They may not argue openly, but they disengage. They delay. They say, maybe. So the issue isn't that your ideas aren't good. It's that they're not being delivered in a way the human brain is wired to accept. The core insight from influence psychology. Here's the foundational idea behind ethical persuasion. People don't decide logically first. They decide emotionally and socially first, then justify logically later. This isn't an insult to intelligence. It's a feature of how the brain conserves energy. In everyday life, people rely on mental shortcuts, quick rules of thumb that help them decide without analyzing everything from scratch. These shortcuts aren't random. They're predictable, and they're shared across cultures and contexts. Persuasion works when you align with those shortcuts instead of fighting them. That's where influence psychology comes in. Decades of behavioral research, including the work of Robert Cialdini, shows that people are more likely to say yes when certain psychological conditions are present. Not because they're tricked, but because the decision feels safe, appropriate, and internally consistent. Ethical influence is not about forcing outcomes. It's about reducing friction in decision-making. When people feel respected, understood, and in control, agreement becomes easier. What ethical persuasion is, and what it is not. Let's be very clear about this up front. Ethical persuasion is not manipulation. It's not lying. It's not pressuring people into decisions they'll regret. Manipulation hides intent and removes choice. Ethical influence does the opposite. It clarifies intent and preserves autonomy. You're not trying to get people. You're helping them decide. Well, that's why the principles you're about to learn work best, when your goal is mutual benefit. They don't override free will. They work because they respect it. This approach is supported by modern psychology, organizational research popularized by thinkers like Adam Grant, and practical negotiation work from practitioners like Chris Voss. Different backgrounds, same conclusion. Influence works best when people feel safe, seen, and self-directed. Why the 6 principles matter. Cialdini identified 6 core principles of persuasion that show up again and again in human behavior. Reciprocity, commitment and consistency, social proof, authority, liking, scarcity. You've experienced all of these, whether you realize it or not. You've felt more open to someone who helped you first. You've stuck with a decision because you'd already said yes publicly. You've followed what others were doing when you weren't sure. You've trusted calm confidence over loud certainty. You've agreed more easily with people who got you. You've valued things more when they felt limited or at risk. These aren't tricks. They're patterns. The problem isn't that people use them. It's that most people use them unconsciously. Learning them gives you choice. You can apply them deliberately, ethically, and appropriately. What we're doing differently in this video. In the next parts of this video, we're not just naming principles. For each one, you'll learn what it actually means in plain language, where people misuse it, why it works psychologically, and most importantly, what to say instead of what you're probably saying now. You'll see short dialogue examples. You'll hear phrases you can adapt immediately, and you'll understand why those phrases work. So you're not memorizing scripts. You're building skill. Think of this as an influence blueprint. Principles first, techniques second, application last. By the end, persuasion won't feel mysterious or manipulative. It'll feel learnable. Quick reminder before we continue. This content is educational. It's not therapy, legal advice, or clinical instruction. Use these tools responsibly, with honesty and respect. If you want more people to actually listen when you speak, hit like, so this video reaches others who need these skills too. Now, let's start with the first principle, the one that quietly shapes almost every human interaction, reciprocity. Let's start with the first principle, not because it's the most powerful, but because it's the most misunderstood. Principle 1, reciprocity. People feel a natural pull to return value when value is given first. Reciprocity is one of the oldest social rules humans have. When someone helps you, listens to you, or gives you something useful, your brain quietly registers a sense of balance. Not debt, balance. That's important. Ethical reciprocity is not about obligation. It's about goodwill. Where people go wrong is thinking reciprocity means giving more or doing favors until someone owes you. That's not persuasion. That's pressure, and people can feel it immediately. Real reciprocity works because it lowers defenses. When someone leads with value, your brain relaxes. You're no longer scanning for threat or manipulation. You're more open, not because you're forced, but because the interaction feels fair. Everyday examples of reciprocity. You see reciprocity working all the time. A coworker helps you solve a problem before asking for support on their project. A friend listens carefully to your situation before sharing their opinion. A manager gives clarity and context before requesting extra effort. Notice what's happening psychologically. Before the request even appears, trust has already been established. Contrast that with what most people do. They lead with the ask. I need your help with this. Can you do me a favor? Can I run something by you? Nothing wrong with these, but they create immediate evaluation. The other person's brain jumps straight to cost time, effort, risk, Reciprocity flips the order. The ethical way to use reciprocity. Ethical reciprocity has 3 rules. Give first, without keeping score. Make the value relevant. Preserve the other person's freedom to say no. Here's the difference in phrasing. Ineffective version. Hey, I helped you last week, so I was hoping you could. This activates resistance. The help now feels like a transaction. Persuasive version. Before I ask you anything, there's something that might be useful for you. That one sentence does 2 things. It signals value. It removes pressure. You're not saying, you owe me. You're saying, I want to be helpful. And here's a key Chris Voss-style adjustment that matters more than people realize. You don't have to say yes. That phrase restores autonomy. When people feel free, they're more willing. Reciprocity scripts you can actually use. Try these patterns. This may or may not be helpful, but here's what I noticed. Before I ask, let me share something that could save you time. No pressure at all. I just wanted to pass this along. When reciprocity is ethical, it feels calm. If it feels tense or strategic, you're probably pushing too hard. If you believe persuasion should always stay honest and respectful, comment ethical below. Principle 2. Commitment and consistency. People want to act in ways that align with what they've already said or done. This principle explains why small decisions matter so much. Human beings don't like internal conflict. When we say something out loud, especially in front of others, we feel a pull to behave consistently with that statement. This isn't stubbornness. It's identity protection. Once someone sees themselves as the kind of person who does X, they naturally move in that direction. Why big asks fail? Most persuasion attempts fail because people jump too fast. They go straight to, can you commit to this? Are you on board? Will you support this fully? The other person hasn't oriented themselves yet. Their brain doesn't know where it stands, so the safest answer is delay. Commitment works best when it's gradual and voluntary. Small yeses build momentum. Ethical commitment in everyday life. Let's say you want buy-in for an idea at work. Ineffective approach. I think we should do this. Can I get everyone's agreement? That invites resistance. Persuasive approach. Does this direction make sense so far? That's a low-risk question. You're not asking for approval, just alignment. Once someone says, yes, that makes sense, they've taken a small step. Now consistency starts working for you. Commitment is about clarity, not traps. Here's an important ethical line. Commitment should reveal what people think, not corner them. Manipulative persuasion uses commitment to trap people into decisions they didn't fully consider. Ethical persuasion uses it to help people articulate their own position. That's why calibrated questions matter. Instead of, can you do this by Friday? Try, what would make a Friday deadline realistic? You're inviting ownership, not compliance. Commitment and identity language. One of the most powerful and ethical ways to use commitment is through identity-based language. People want to act in line with how they see themselves. Examples. You're someone who values clear communication. Does this approach fit that? Since reliability matters to you, how do you want to handle this? You're not labeling them falsely. You're reflecting values they already demonstrate. When someone says, yes, that matters to me, they've committed, willingly. Practical scripts for commitment. Here are phrases that work because they feel safe. At this point, what feels reasonable? What would you be comfortable committing to? Does this align with how you usually like to work? Notice what's missing. Pressure, ultimatums, forced yes-no choices. You're guiding the conversation, not controlling it. How reciprocity and commitment work together. These two principles often appear back-to-back in effective persuasion. First, you give value, lowering defenses. Then, you invite a small voluntary commitment, creating momentum. For example, before we decide anything, here's a summary that might help. Based on that, does this option feel worth exploring further? Nothing aggressive, nothing manipulative, just structure. Quick recap before we move on. So far, you've learned. Reciprocity works when value comes before requests. Commitment works when people choose small yeses themselves. Pressure kills persuasion. Autonomy builds trust. If this already feels different from how you normally communicate, that's a good sign. In the next part, we'll cover 2 principles that explain why people follow the group and why calm credibility beats loud confidence every time. Before we move on, type yes in the comments if you want more practical phrases you can use in real conversations. Up to now, we've focused on how you show up in a conversation, how you give value and invite commitment. Now, we shift to something just as powerful, how people look outward to decide what's safe, smart, and acceptable. This brings us to 2 principles that quietly shape group behavior, meetings, and decisions every day. Principle 3, social proof. When people feel uncertain, they look to others to decide what to do. Social proof isn't about peer pressure. It's about risk reduction. When the outcome isn't obvious, the human brain asks a simple question. What are people like me doing in this situation? If the answer is unclear, hesitation grows. If the answer is clear, decisions feel easier. That's why social proof works best when uncertainty is high. New ideas, unfamiliar choices, or moments where someone doesn't want to stand out. Where people misuse social proof. Most people apply social proof in a vague, unconvincing way. They say things like, everyone thinks this is a good idea. This is pretty common. A lot of people are doing it. Those statements trigger skepticism instead of trust. Why? Because the brain immediately asks, which people like whom? In what situation? Ethical social proof is specific and relevant, not loud or exaggerated. How ethical social proof actually works. There are 3 rules that make social proof persuasive. Similarity matters more than quantity. People care more about what people like them are doing than what most people are doing. Context matters. Social proof works when it fits the situation, not when it's generic. Subtlety matters. The goal is reassurance, not pressure. For example, instead of saying, everyone on the team agrees with this, try. People in similar roles usually find this approach reduces friction. That phrasing does something important. It doesn't force agreement. It normalizes acceptance. Practical social proof scripts. Here are phrases you can adapt immediately. Others who faced this decision noticed. What people in your position tend to appreciate is, when this comes up, most teams handle it by. Notice the pattern. No exaggeration. No coercion. No implied judgment if they disagree. You're simply saying, you wouldn't be alone if you chose this. That reduces psychological risk, and risk is what stalls decisions. Principle 4. Authority. People trust credible signals, not dominance or arrogance. Authority is one of the most misunderstood persuasion principles. Many people think authority means speaking louder, taking control, showing superiority. In reality, authority works in the opposite direction. True authority feels calm, prepared, and unforced. People don't follow authority because it demands compliance. They follow it because it reduces uncertainty. Authority is about signals, not status. You don't need a title to signal authority. The brain looks for cues like clear structure, confidence without urgency, accurate framing, comfort with silence. Ironically, people who over-explain or over-defend their position often feel less authoritative. Why? Because it suggests uncertainty. Authority says, I've thought this through. Not, please believe me. Common authority mistakes. Here's where people sabotage themselves. Listing credentials instead of demonstrating clarity. Name-dropping excessively. Talking too much when a pause would do more work. Ethical authority doesn't ask for trust. It earns it quietly. Authority through clarity. One of the strongest authority signals is the ability to summarize complex ideas simply. This is where a Chris Voss-style technique called a "that's right" summary becomes powerful. Instead of pushing your point, you reflect theirs accurately. For example, it sounds like your main concern is timing and you want to avoid creating extra work. When the other person responds with, "That's right," something shifts. They feel understood. And people are far more open to guidance from someone who understands them. Authority scripts you can use. Try these patterns. Based on what you shared, here's what seems to matter most. The trade-off here appears to be speed versus accuracy. From experience, this is usually where things break down. You're not claiming superiority. You're offering orientation. That's what authority really is, helping people see the landscape clearly. Calm beats control. One of the most counterintuitive findings in persuasion research is this. Calm confidence is more persuasive than forceful certainty. When you rush, interrupt, or push, people subconsciously assume there's risk. When you slow down and speak with precision, their brain relaxes. Authority isn't about control. It's about predictability. How social proof and authority work together. These two principles reinforce each other when used ethically. Social proof answers. What do people like me usually do? Authority answers. Who can help me understand this clearly? Together, they reduce fear. For example, teams in similar situations usually handle it this way. Based on what you shared, that approach would protect your timeline. No pressure, no dominance, just clarity plus reassurance. Quick recap before we move on. So far, you've learned. Social proof works best when it's specific and relevant. Authority is about calm clarity, not control. Over-explaining weakens credibility. Understanding others increases influence more than asserting yourself. In the final part, we'll cover the last two principles, the ones that shape connection and urgency, and then bring all six together into practical, real-life application. Before we move on, remember, influence isn't about being louder. It's about being clearer. Up to this point, we've focused on structure value, commitment, social cues, and credibility. Now we move into two principles that shape how people feel in the moment, and how that feeling influences decisions. These last two principles are often abused. When used unethically, they feel manipulative. When used correctly, they feel human. Principle 5, liking. People say yes more easily to people they feel understood by. Liking is not about charm. It's not about being funny, agreeable, or trying to win approval. At its core, liking comes from one thing: felt understanding. People don't need you to agree with them. They need to feel that you get them. Why trying to be liked backfires? Many people sabotage influence by trying too hard to be likable. They over-apologize, soften every statement, avoid disagreement, say yes when they mean no. Ironically, this reduces respect. Why? Because it signals uncertainty about your own position. Liking grows when someone feels seen, not when you disappear. Tactical empathy, defined simply. Tactical empathy means demonstrating understanding without necessarily agreeing. You're not validating every position. You're acknowledging emotions and perspectives. This lowers defensiveness, which opens the door to influence. Practical techniques: labeling and mirroring. Two simple tools make people feel understood quickly. Labeling means naming what you think the other person might be feeling. Examples: it sounds like you're under pressure to get this right. It seems like timing is your biggest concern. If you're wrong, they'll correct you. If you're right, they'll relax. Either way, the conversation moves forward. Mirroring means repeating the last few important words they said, calmly. If they say, "I'm worried this will create more work," you respond, "More work." This invites them to expand and feel heard. Liking scripts that build influence. Use phrases like, "It sounds like this matters more than it might look on the surface." "It seems like you're trying to balance speed and quality." "I might be wrong, but it feels like there's some hesitation here." Notice the humility. I might be wrong. That phrase reduces threat and increases trust. Principle 6, scarcity. People value things more when they feel limited or at risk. Scarcity is not about fake urgency. It's not countdown timers or pressure tactics. Ethical scarcity is about honesty around constraints. Your time is limited. Your energy is limited. Opportunities are limited. Pretending otherwise actually reduces credibility. Why fake urgency fails. When people sense manufactured pressure, they resist. Statements like, "This is your last chance. Act now or miss out. Everyone else already agreed." These trigger protection mode. Ethical scarcity does the opposite. It respects reality. Ethical scarcity in everyday conversations. Instead of pushing urgency, you state boundaries calmly. Examples. I won't be able to revisit this after Friday. I can commit to this if we decide by tomorrow. I want to be upfront about my bandwidth. You're not forcing a decision. You're clarifying conditions. That clarity helps people decide without resentment. Scarcity scripts that feel respectful. Try these. Given my current commitments, this is what I can offer. If we move forward, it would need to be within this window. I want to be transparent about my limits. Scarcity works when it's informational, not emotional. Bringing all 6 principles together. Now, let's integrate everything into one realistic scenario. Imagine this situation. You want buy-in from a colleague on a project change. Step 1. Reciprocity. Before we decide anything, here's a short summary that might save you time. Step 2. Liking. Tactical empathy. It sounds like you're concerned about adding complexity. Step 3. Authority. Clarity. The main trade-off here is speed versus long-term stability. Step 4. Social proof. Teams in similar situations usually handle it this way. Step 5. Commitment. Does this direction make sense so far? Step 6. Scarcity. If we move forward, we'd need to decide by Thursday. No pressure, no manipulation, just structure. Each principle reduces friction. Together, they guide decisions naturally. A simple influence practice you can try this week. Here's your influence blueprint challenge. Pick one real conversation coming up. Choose 2 principles only, not all 6. Write 1 sentence using each. Say them slowly and calmly. For example, 1 empathy label, 1 commitment question. That's it. Skill grows through repetition, not intensity. Share this video with 1 smart friend or coworker who keeps getting talked over. Final recap. What actually changes influence? Let's bring this home. You've learned that persuasion is about reducing friction, not increasing force. Influence grows from understanding, not dominance. Ethical persuasion preserves choice and dignity. The 6 principles work because they align with how people already decide. You're not becoming someone else. You're becoming more intentional with how you communicate. Like the video. If you learned at least 1 technique you'll try this week, comment your next real situation, work, friends, or relationships, and include a keyword like confidence, boundaries, or negotiation. Subscribe to the Influence Blueprint and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next set of ethical persuasion tools and practical phrases. Influence isn't manipulation. It's a learnable skill. And now, you have the blueprint.